And Teo I mentioned, so I think we should maybe get started in here. So really, we want to know what's going on in your neck of the woods and what you think is going to be happening next. What trends, what predictions, what tools, what topics, what issues should we be paying attention to? Should we be listening about? And maybe we should act upon. What might we be sharing with our colleagues when we walk home? What should the audience here be thinking about when they go home? What nuggets of wisdom, what golden nuggets might you impart, panelists? So what we're going to do, we've got a set after this abstract, as you can see below the abstract that I've got up on the screen here. As I scroll below, you'll see a set of 4 questions for each of 4 areas. We've got one area is going to be called Muddling Up OER and Open Education Confusion Craze. We've got a second area called Binge, Bulk, and Informal Bit Learning. The third area is going to be Outsourcing of Content Delivery and Assessment. And the fourth area is going to be called Welcome to the Future. The audience will be designing the 5th area and the 6th area. How we're going to do this is we have a set of 4 questions, and we've picked one to ask the panelists, and we'll let the first 3 people answer the question and who want to, and the 4th person rebut it, rejoinder it, extend it, or expand on something they heard from the other 3 panelists, something they would like to add to. Once those 4 people have answered a question, we will probably move on to the next set question. Unless it gets heated and we want to stay on that topic. We may stay, it depends on how it flows, but that's kind of how we're going to try and orchestrate this. Then we're going to switch to an audience question. So on this first topic here, Muddling Up OER, we're going to ask one of these questions, then we're going to go to the audience to ask one question. And then we may come back to a second question from our list and then go on to the second session. It depends on how it goes. So that's how we're going to kind of formulate this. The panelists who don't have a copy of the questions, raise your hands and I will pass around these questions to the panelists so you can finally see what they are. I think everyone else may have a copy of these. So in the first section in here, we've got Muddling Up OER, Open Education, and the Confusion Craze. How many of you are confused sometimes about OER? How many got a little less confused from our keynote this morning? He clarified some things for us, didn't he? Okay. How many of you are excited about this area after this morning's keynote? How many of you slept in and didn't come to the keynote this morning and missed a brilliant talk? Do not sleep in, okay. All right, so I've passed around one of the handouts there that had my numbering on it. So who's got my numbering on it? Someone does, thank you. Okay, great. Sorry, John, there you go. All right, so the first question we're gonna ask is number 3 on the list. With the surging interest in openness, is the designation of labeling of something in education as open just going to become another meaningless label, akin to how organic is applied to food? Who's our foodie in here? Tom Reeves. Tom Reeves. Tom Reeves.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yes, I raised this issue yesterday. I do fear that we are using terms. A few years ago, it was learning objects. Everything was going to be a learning object, and now we've got OER and so forth. I think, unfortunately, that term becomes overused and emptied of meaning. And what was the term you used this morning, Rajiv? What kind of washing? Pardon? Open washing, yeah, that was a good one. So I am concerned that this term might become meaningless, and so unless we really engage in serious research, socially responsible research on this whole area of OER, it's probably going to go the way of the dodo and so many other things in higher educational technology.
Who would like to jump in on this question from the panel? Go ahead and raise your hands, and Sanjay's grabbing it, okay.
I think this is a very important point, and to look at open in its true spirit is very important. And Rajiv really illustrated the importance of openness in terms of not just something that is reduced as cost or availability of as free to some extent, but it's important to have the 4 or 5 R that he explained in detail. I think my personal concern today about open is related to the way it is being presented in the business world. and particularly the way some people in the open movement itself promote openness. And that is a concern for, nobody stops from doing businesses, but if businesses hide behind the plank of openness and try to release something, I have my own concern. And I think we have experiences from the open access field, and it has happened. You grab all the data from people, ask people to submit their papers to their website, and then later on convert into data analytics, and then asks people to pay premium membership fees to get access to those data they shared with you. So it's already happened. So I'm worried about the open educational resource movement maybe going towards that. And we already have 3-4 examples of similar type of initiatives, sometime promoted by open people themselves. So it's a legitimate concern and an excellent question for all of us to reflect.
And Sheila Jaganathan would like to jump in here. You got a microphone right next to you.
So I work with the World Bank, and so my clients are really developing country professionals from 200 countries. And so my concern with the way we label openness is, for example, the MOOCs, the massive open online courses. So they're considered open. But I get hundreds of emails from participants asking me why we have a $50 certificate fee. So it's really not open. And I've had countless discussions with Coursera and edX. And as a pilot, they lowered the $50 fee to $5. But $50 for somebody in a developing country is a lot. And if you're taking, say, 10 MOOCs in a year or something, that adds up. So are MOOCs really open is my question.
John's smiling a lot here. I think he has something to say.
Well, I guess so. I think open tends to be used as a synecdoche. It's something which, it's a word that means a lot of, stands for a lot of different things. And we can only really sensibly look at it if we understand what we mean by closed. And I think what we mean by closed is that in some sense there are restrictions on our ability to do something. I come from an open university, and what open universities mean really that they are less restricted in the ways in which they provide access to education in the first place. Morten Poulsen has 6 dimensions of openness that he came up with in the early 90s, the hexagon of cooperative freedom, I think he calls it, which is about, and Terry Anderson and I came up with, I think, 10. But really, I mean, we could have carried on adding dimensions of openness forever and ever. So I mean, totally ridiculous that it has become a marketing tool, and it means, it's certainly, I mean, organic, actually. I think organic means something, at least in Canada. There's a legal restriction on what organic means. There's a very specific term that applies to only a very small subset of food. I mean, I mean, maybe natural would be one which is kind of slightly closer to it. And I don't think we should restrict what it means, but I think we should think about the dimensions, not about just whether it's open or not. That doesn't matter. What matters is how it's open, where the doors are open and where they're shut, and above all, where they're shut.
And can you find them? To rebuttal here, the extension here will naturally come from our keynote speaker this morning, who has a lot to say about this.
Sure. It's an interesting question to ask, and I feel there's really tension on 2 different sides, I think. So when Sanjay points to, and even Tom points to open washing, commercial entities sort of using open in a way that's a marketing ploy that really is more about proprietary practices, that's certainly clearly open washing. And I think one of the things I like is that the open community has grown so much, and people are very attentive and sensitive to those kinds of violations of spirit. So that's one area in which I think the definition of open you might think is posing a challenge. At the same time, I think there's immense clarity. So I don't think anyone doubts, for example, what open educational resources means. It means a very specific thing, almost as well regulated as the term organic in Canada, for example. There are specific types of Creative Commons licenses that meet the definition of OER and others that simply do not, for example. Thank you. So I think that's interesting. What's also interesting, and I think, Sanjay, you were kind of hitting at this slightly as well, is within the open movement, I mean, there are different factions, certainly, and there are leading funders that will insist that a particular open license that's on the more open end of the spectrum in terms of the number of permissions that people are granted is the threshold above which all of their funded projects must be licensed. And that creates an interesting dynamic. To me, openness, as I've said earlier, is equal parts about agency and access. And so when I work with faculty every day, I work very much with faculty who will only enter this space if they are able to apply a non-commercial license, for example, or a non-commercial clause to their license, which doesn't meet some people's definition of what they're comfortable with. But I think being open about that, allowing people agency to even choose what open license they want, is incredibly important. The movement, I think, is inclusive, it is diverse. This also means that terms such as open pedagogy and open educational practices are being actively contested at the moment. But I will say, I actually don't see that as a drawback. I think this is a symptom of a movement that is getting increasingly heterogeneous, that is expanding, that is bringing in people who are completely unfamiliar with the terminology while they've been actually engaging in open educational practices all along. So I see a maturing movement having these sorts of discussions. There's not just one or two people trying to keep commercial entities in check. So I see, I'm less worried, I suppose. I see the debate as healthy, and I think the critical pieces of what demarcates open washing from, let's say, OER are clear enough at this point. So I'm a little less worried.
So let's go to the audience, and we have some incentives. The first person who asks a question will get a free book that on MOOCs and open education in the developing world that Dr. Tom Reynolds, who's walking around, has authored with myself and Dr. Tom Reeves. Who has a question related
That's
to
a good
this
incentive.
topic? Right in the front row, she has a question.
Okay,
so,
here we go.
Related to this topic, it has to be related to this topic of OER and open education and so forth. Yeah.
No pressure.
Can't be what we're having for dinner. Okay. So.
Okay, so my question is, I guess, related to all of this, but more specifically to MOOCs. Is that appropriate for this question?
Sure.
Okay.
That does. Yep.
So something that I've been very interested in, but that also caught my attention yesterday. Actually, it was during Sheila's talk. And she had mentioned that 77.4% of people who take World Bank MOOCs are non-native English speakers. I come from the field of TESOL. That's the field that I continue to work in and do research in, and I'm wondering, that probably isn't just the case for World Bank, especially if we're focusing on developing countries. I think we're going to find that most of the participants in these MOOCs coming from that environment are going to be non-native English speakers, and I'm just wondering, what role does TESOL play in that? Have TESOL professionals been consulted for their expertise on how to teach non-native speakers content using TESOL best practices and methodologies and things like that? So
How do you spell your first name? We'll put that in.
Christy.
So we have a symposium we did yesterday, a pre-conference. If you go to trainingshare.com, you can get all the notes, all the slides, even some of the videos and some of the audio files, trainingshare.com. One word, trainingshare.com, archive talks. So Sheila, you want to give that one a whirl?
Sure. Just an excellent comment. Now, of course, let's chat offline to see how perhaps we integrate that as an additional tool in the World Bank's Open Learning Campus. Having said that, that 76% were non-native speakers of English, but our primary audience are policymakers and practitioners, and so a lot of them come with some familiarity with English and so on, except in, say, the Francophone countries or in the Latin American countries where French and Spanish become the primary language. So in some sense, because, and one of the other statistics that I shared yesterday as well is more than 50% were masters and above, so highly qualified professionals. And so they may have more familiarity with English than an average student.
This is also related to a larger question in terms of language just generally, and I think Paul might have a comment in terms of his work around the globe using like language resources that don't necessarily involve the goal of teaching people English, but rather gaining literacy in their own language.
Paul, you want to describe your MOOC and what you did to get language facilitated?
There are two things that I have a little bit of experience in that regard. One is my own MOOC that invited about 20,000 people from 170 different countries, and I tried to utilize a lot of different contextual resources from various places to draw attention from various parts of the world. I was very impressed when I saw students signing up from somewhere in Tanzania, but next day I got students from Lahore, Pakistan, and so forth, and I started to see students coming in from various places. I was wondering, how did they even find this? And I later realized that a lot of students who joined my class tweeted about the course in their own languages, and eventually many of the students who participated in my class downloaded all my videos and created a low bandwidth version of videos, and also added their own language subtitles. I did not ask them to do that. I mean, I did not even give them any direction or anything, but they did it for the hope that more people who are speaking their own language would be able to access it. So it happened all by themselves. I think they saw that as a value. So that's my experience with the MOOC part. My project, one of my projects called SMILE, Stanford Mobile Inquiry-Based Learning Environment. If you go to this website, smile.stanford.edu, you'll be able to see about 15, 20 different languages there. The interface of the SMILE system, it's a mobile learning management system, basically. It has different languages, including even indigenous languages. I did not ask them to put those languages, but they heard about SMILE project and they asked me, hey, can I give you my language? And sure, I would love to add your language to my system so that they could use it in their local communities as well. So either I've been so lucky or fortunate to have these volunteers from around the world who had a passion about education, and they shared their contents and talents with me and my team. I don't know what really got them to be interested in doing this, but I think they might have seen some value in this learning environment or the contents that I was providing, and therefore they did it on their own will. And that was an interesting experience for me.
And you can read about it in that book you just got, because he's got a chapter in there. It explains it all. Do we have a panelist here that hasn't talked yet, who would like to be the last speaker on this section before we move on to section 2 and address this issue?
Oh, now I have to be super critical, huh? Is that the rule?
Anything you want.
Okay, so one comment, like translating from English is obviously one option, but there are also MOOC platforms that are not English, that are not driven by content from US universities. For instance, in Germany and Austria, in the German-speaking countries, we have the platform iMOOCs, which is being put forward by the TU Graz. And they do have great success with having a MOOC platform that offers MOOCs that are not in English language, mostly in German language, some in other languages, in other European languages. So just one comment. And yeah, in general, I loved this analogy of organic food and OER, and I would add that yes, if overall the quality of learning becomes better by more people striving to have this label, be able to add this label open to their portfolio, then maybe it does what organic has done for food. So that would, in my opinion, not be a terrible thing.
Okay, let's go to the second category here, binge, bulk, and informal bit learning. I had a guest in my class a week ago, and I asked him, Dr. Ray Schroeder from University of Illinois Springfield, what's coming in the future? And he said binge, bulk, and informal bit learning. So I had to look this up, and there was a September 22nd, 2017 article that cites research that binging content may be highly effective, as opposed to what us psychologists have been reading forever, that you have to have spaced practice. There's actually some research out there that shows that people who study in bulk or intensive kinds of forms of learning are learning more, kind of a Netflix, so what can the field of online learning learn from Netflix, if anything? And we're going to do number 1 and 2 together here. Is binge learning or MOOC-based binge learning the next killer app for the online learning field? Do we have someone here who would like to start us off on this notion of binge learning and talk about it? Chris, you've grabbed the microphone, so I assume that's you. And Teo's looking at me funny, so I assume he wants to jump in after you. So,
Okay, I'm going to try to talk, but my voice isn't that good. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no because I think probably have 40 years of research. You mentioned the psychology research on space practice and interleaved practice and distributed practice, that sort of thing, that really show the results work well with that. I'm afraid with the binge learning, you'd get a result right away, but I think days and weeks and years down the road, you'd lose that result. Where I think the evidence and data suggest using that space practice, you may get a lower result right away, but 2 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 months, 2 years down the road, you'll get a better result.
Theo?
Okay, then I add something. I don't know any binge learner. My students are not binge learners. But to add something, we can learn from Netflix. That's excitement, that is fun, that is tension, that it's everything but boredom, And a lot of professors and learning materials are still very, very boring. So, and Netflix does a good job in that. And learning analytics. Netflix analyzes every pattern, everything you click on. And that's the thing that would help us to give proper feedback to our students. So we can learn from Netflix.
So we've got a resident psychologist right here I'm going to ignore for a second because I got a hand up here and here. So Saul, would you like to take a stab at this as well?
Yeah, I'm going to switch over to the discussion of informal learning. And I think it's really important to get some definitions here. Informal learning is when the learner sets the objective, the learner determines for themselves how much they need to learn until they feel they have accomplished whatever it is that they want to accomplish. So what we're defining in terms of accomplishment number 1 is not going to be the definitions differ from formal learning to begin with, so we may be comparing apples and potatoes or something. So I think that's one thing that's really important. There's research in communication that suggests that when people are really desperate for information, and I'm using the word information, not instruction, they will do what is essentially binge getting, for lack of a technical term there. So in other words, they will keep looking, and all the stuff that you read about how websites need to be formatted properly for easy reading, you can ignore all of that. If you've got something that people really want, they will put up with the ugliest, most difficult to read website written in the worst way. And I think that we're not, so what's happening here is we're comparing two different things and we're forgetting about motivational issues. No one is going to binge on anything that they don't care about. So if it really sucks, I promise you they're not going to spend 6 hours on it. If they're desperate and it sucks, they're going to keep going because they're going to look for something that's worthwhile. And so I think what's happening, is this going to happen? It's been happening for years. There were studies in the 70s that said people were spending, and I don't know if the numbers are great, but they were spending anywhere between 40 and 700 hours a year in studying whatever it is they want. I'm just finishing up a study now where just in terms of the workplace, about 69% of all workers, and this is workers across Canada, across section, different types of jobs, different situations, different types of employers, different industries, about 69% of them spend 1 to 2 hours a week learning on the job. A lot of them are doing this despite the fact that their employers give them like zero support for it. And it's because they're desperate, they need the information. So I don't think we should be comparing desperation learning or I'm highly motivated learning with when we have some luxury learning.
I just wanted to add 3 points. I totally agree about the fact that we should learn from Netflix, because in the era of edutainment, learning needs to be much more engaging than it is. So that's one. The second, on binge learning, the article, Kurt sent an article which showed that in the short term there were some benefits and cognitive benefits to binge learning. But if you go back to traditional pedagogy, which we cannot avoid thinking about, you go for Bloom's taxonomy and all that, you go from the lower level skills of recall and understanding to the higher level of application, synthesis, and actually creating new products and creating new knowledge. And for that, you need a lot of practice and application to real work and so on and so forth. So if binge learning is integrated with such activities that make pedagogical sense, then that is something to consider. But the verdict is still out. And then apparently in binge learning, there are two types. There's the temporal, which is you keep drilling down, or you just keep digging deeper into the same subject, as opposed to content where you keep drilling down into more and more of the same. And we'll also have to see what the research says on which one is more effective than the other. The last point is, Kurt, I don't know what you mean by bit learning, but I have introduced a program called Byte Learning, Byte Size and Byte Plus, and these are 8 to 12 minute learning that's short, focused, uses storytelling and multimedia. And I find that we've captured something like 5,000 such bite-sized programs, and I find it's hugely effective for capturing tacit knowledge. So knowledge that's in people's heads, lessons of what works in one country and in one sector like agriculture or poverty alleviation, and these would be experts who've been working on it for a while. And so if you can capture those lessons as bite-sized and some easy to use mechanisms like TED-like talks or podcasts or knowledge notes, then they can be very effective. But I don't know if that's what you mean by bit.
It is. And we'll give Saul the 15, 30-second counter before I go to my right. We'll end on the left here. He has something to add to that.
I just want to follow up on that. One of the hottest topics in training and development is something called micro-learning, which is an application of space learning, even though it's not really in the way they apply it. But they're 8 to 12 is like really long in their thing. It's like 30 seconds to 5 minutes is what they're shooting for. And it's super hot. It's really good for reminder learning. It's really, so you got to look at it as part of a larger strategy. You can't just rely on it specifically.
John's had his hand up here. Joa hasn't had a chance to speak yet. Did you have a comment on this one, Joa, or not? Okay, let's go to the lady in the back here then. First, Joa, take a crack, and then we'll go to John, and then we're going to have our psychology expert do the rebuttal.
As a linguist, I teach technical communication skills at the local polytechnic. And personally, I've studied 5 or 6 languages, so I agree that you can do things in multiple use activities. And then, as Theo said, we just want to do it again, and that's okay. And if you're learning languages, it doesn't hurt to jump right in. And if you went to the library, you would take out the book multiple times, and you would get the same experience. In this way, with open education, you can just do it for free. And with all the new models coming where you can download with your different accessibility tools, it can work much more smoothly and available to more people. So, and if you're doing it in pieces, why not learn this and learn that and then see what sticks with you and where you want to get better at it. So I think it's a great opportunity.
Tom Rees has winked at me 3 or 4 times. I got a feeling no? You don't? Okay, so.
Yeah, Kurt, can I just interject?
Yeah.
Are they saying so that content, the content of the learning is good, is the instrumental aspect as far as what is good?
Content, I think Saul was saying content's more important than the design. But,
and then the follow-up question would be, in terms of all the binge studies that were favored distributed practice, what were they binging on?
Which, it's a nice little segue into my bit, but first I should observe that if you're going to binge learn, then the chances are you're actually getting nano-learning, which is infinitesimally small and you can hardly see it. But I happen to be quite interested in Netflix because I spent quite a lot of years investigating uses of collaborative filters in learning. And Netflix was famously created the Netflix Prize, which was $1 million to improve their algorithm by, was it 10% or 1%? At the time, they were trying to recommend to people what they wanted to see next. Netflix no longer does that. They paid their $1 million. In fact, 2 people got to the prize within 3 hours of each other. What Netflix does now is try to sell you stuff. And Netflix has got quite a complex bit of economics going on there. They've got a whole bunch of shows that they want to push, as well as a lot of data on what people like to watch. And ideally, they push the cheapest things possible to the people, to as many people as possible. Now, I don't think that the application of this kind of algorithm is going to be terribly useful in an educational context. The just-in-time learning, certainly, I mean, that's been a thing for 30 or more years as a really good idea. And on-demand learning, so that you can binge learn the stuff that you need right now, makes quite a large amount of sense. And it doesn't have to be content. I mean, when we say on-demand learning, it can be engagement. I try to learn a new musical instrument every year. I binge learn. But a tiny bit of that involves watching YouTube videos. Most of it involves just practicing, really, really a lot. And I think we need to remember that this is not just about content. In fact, content's a tiny part of it. It's about learning. And learning doesn't happen through content. Learning happens through engagement.
And we'll have the wrap-up of this one from our resident psychologist here, Rajiv.
I feel like you've given me a distinct designation.
Honorary degree, honorary panel.
So just a few things, and I'll make these points quickly. One is, I think, if we want to learn from Netflix, perhaps let's learn from all of its missteps as well, not the least of which are incredibly poorly designed algorithms. If you've ever used Netflix, you'll see periodically very poor choices that have been selected for you. Let's learn from those. Let's try to learn from vocational psychological tests as well that are really based on people who already work in certain fields. And if your response pattern happens to match those of people who already are, let's say, airplane pilots, then you'll be recommended to join that profession. Of course, that completely ignores the systemic barriers that have prevented many other groups from entering those professions. There are limits to these algorithms. Let's also not ignore the reality about access. There's a reason why so many people attempted for years to use virtual private networks, VPNs, to get around Netflix's geographic selection criteria. They've cut down on that, of course. Let's not forget about bandwidth and access itself. If this becomes the predominant form of entertainment or access to entertainment, for example, what are the populations that are now being systematically excluded just because it's unaffordable to produce? And finally, if we're going to learn from Netflix, if we're going to talk about this in the context of learning, let's remember we're talking about a very passive experience, right? And so aside from all of the important research that's already been described in terms of spaced and so on, I'll also just remind us that passive learning is not particularly effective learning. I would rather, if we're going to have a comparison to Netflix, I would rather have my students not be the viewers, but the producers, the directors, the actors.
Do we have a question from the audience related to this topic? And
How about anybody in the back? Not to.
No one in the back. He's got his hand up. Nathaniel, I think, has his hand up in the front.
Okay.
And as Tom's going there, I'll mention I interviewed someone in Africa who had taken 750 MOOCs, got certificates in half of them. He was binge learning because he was worried Coursera would now put a fee in, which they've done. So some people in Africa are, in fact, doing some binging here on the MOOC side. Anyhow, Nathaniel.
So my question is around, you've heard of the Borg, you've probably heard of Matrix. One of the things when I first saw this bit learning come out, and it's relevant to binge, the term binge isn't a positive one, it's a negative connotation, obviously. But one of my concerns in this, and that's even watching younger children as they engage with technology, all of this comes through technology. A really good comment about it being passive. But my other concern going forward is too invasive. You've heard about people that are hooked on Facebook so bad they don't have a real life, Second Life, and all these kinds of things. It's really actually starting to become exceptionally invasive. And when is our field, not necessarily online learning, but when is our field of education and technology going to say, I don't want the little tiny bites coming at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because the consequence is I'm so stressed by the end of the day, I got to throw the thing and bury it in the sand. The reality is, we keep talking about how it's fantastic, the digital learning, and again, how fantastic it is Netflix. Go sit in Netflix for 2 days. How fantastic is that to your psyche, to your body, to your, So my question is...
Yeah, what's the question?
Yeah, my question is, what is it going to take, or where do we find a line to identify what meaningful use is for these little bits of learning?
Okay, there's a lot of people that responded to the first one. Let's hear from someone who didn't get a chance on the first go-round of this question. Is anyone here? Because I know most people have responded. Sanjay, you're looking like...
Yeah. Not directly related to your question, Nathaniel, but I think that's very important in terms of how much digital technology is making intrusion to our private life, and how much pressure teachers are going to take. In terms of online learning, teachers are already taking extra load in terms of 24/7 responsiveness. That's the online learning puts pressure on teachers. But the new ways of delivering technology in terms of bite-sized learning, whatever forms we tell, it's definitely a challenge. And I don't think there is a possibility of telling yes or no to that, because it's a process. As we get involved in more digitalization of different types of educational activities as well as our physical life, it's going to be more intrusive than what is happening right now. It's an obvious process. Some people will definitely will make choices because of national laws related to these kind of things. I'm actually more interested and I'm more likely to comment about what John talked about. And it's about whether we're talking about names or whatever we talk about this, the binge learning or bite learning or X learning, Y learning. It's important for as human beings to look at learning as learning per se. Learning is a journey, and we just compartmentalize these things into formal learning for certain degrees things and informal learning for certain things. But ultimately, what works in life is the informal learning that we go through whole life, not just the PhD that I earned and I don't do anything with that afterwards.
Very good.
So it's important to look learning as an integrated process, and therefore all these forms of new technological forms will always be there in our life. It's not going to, no thing is going to be replaced by the other. Having said that, there is saying that newspapers will die, some 2030 or somewhere, that's a prediction. And there was less paper society being talked about, but we today probably use more paper than ever before. So its situation is probably going to continue all those things. Nothing is going to replace anything.
So we're going to go to John for about a 15-second response to that, maybe 30 seconds before we go to number 3 in this list. We're about 15 minutes away from closing on here. We got 2 sections left to go.
Yeah, Kurt.
Tom, where'd you go?
No, I'm right here, Kurt. Actually, we could segue right into the next section, which involves what is the role of IHEs, institutions of higher education, change. We've talked about informal learning and the resources and the concepts that are available. But as the role of IHEs change, is it good to outsource part of your learning resources? Who are the reputable providers of these resources? And what's the best way to allocate your faculty time in terms of, should we allocate faculty times in terms of design of learning as opposed to production of content?
So we're looking at the first 2 questions up there on the screen. In effect, we're combining the 2 together in this third section. I think John has a final comment on the second session before we segue.
I can segue. actually, because it fits quite well. It's whether Netflix and other collaborative filters, Amazon, you name it, are pushing. What they want to do is to sell you stuff. And their algorithms work to sell you stuff. They're not for your benefit. And I think the risk is that e-learning stuff does the same kind of thing. This is not the kind of algorithm we want, I hope. Some of us might. We want to make large amounts of money. But it's not, we don't want to rely on these things. The thing that the Star Trek people got wrong about the Borg was that they missed the fact that what's important is not the fact that it's a hive mind. It's that what's important is the connections between those minds and how those are built. And that really doesn't work. I'd say, and leading that into outsourcing, no, outsourcing is the old thing. Outsourcing is what we've always done. I don't know, it seems a weird North American thing. They really like textbooks here. Those of you from elsewhere, I should tell you this. North America loves textbooks. This is not a thing in Europe, and it's not a thing for many of us, but we have always outsourced the learning experience. It is always a distributed experience. What we lose when we do that is control over the teaching process. So what I think we should be looking at, instead of us controlling the teaching process, is learners controlling their learning process. And for that, outsourcing sounds like a pretty damn good idea, because they can pick and choose stuff from, not just from us, but from anyone.
The nice thing about this question, everybody on this panel is an expert at it, but some people nudging that I know are addressing. Theo's grabbed the mic, and then I know Paul Kim's got a lot to say about this, and Saul will give the recap on this one. If anyone else would like to jump in as well, let me know. But Theo, Paul, yeah. Saul, yeah. For sure.
I heard the word money, so I jump in and I change my hat to an administrator hat. Money is important also in developing stuff. So outsourcing, yes, if the quality is good and it is cheap, and we can take that also from a commercial organization, we would do that. I think it's really important to keep also an eye on what are the costs, who's paying the bill. I didn't hear so far nobody talk about that. So maybe I'm a little bit critical then also on the MOOCs and open education and all this stuff. Somebody has to pay it. At our university, I'm vice president of the biggest university in Germany. We stopped funding MOOCs because it's so costly, and we don't have the money to invest in those things. So it's a government thing. If they want that, we will do it, and we would really support it and be motivated, but you have to pay for that. So outsourcing will be partly the future, especially when it comes to highly innovative, technically complicated products. We cannot expect our professors to develop such good quality products. So I think outsourcing is not a big problem, it's an opportunity.
Paul, would you like to jump in on this one with all your connections in the Silicon Valley?
I think what we need to care more about is what kind of learnable moments we are about to create, by what environment, by what solutions, how we deliver, how do we produce and curate the contents. It's secondary to me. I think what's most important is what are the learning needs, and how do we create the best learnable moments, and what does it take to do that is the most important question. And I think there are so many things that we should follow up with what the private industry is doing. In terms of Netflix, I think it's a great company, I think, and then they're generating a lot of money, and they beat Blockbuster. You guys know Blockbuster was a big thing, and Netflix came in and they just beat them and then blew them out of the water, because the Blockbuster did not continue to think about the future, whereas Netflix thought about streaming is the thing of the future, and then they started to do that. In fact, gentleman here in front talked about the problems associated with binge learning and all those things. But the private industry has figured out a lot of things, and we need to learn a lot about how they are analyzing data and how they're using the latest innovations to serve their needs. we could actually use some of the algorithms in the education space. We could try to use them to learn more about the user's needs and how do we create the best learnable moments. If you watch one video, then I'd like to suggest something that's relevant to you. And you mentioned about having your devices as disruptive objects around you, but I mean, there's an airplane mode. You can just turn it off. And in fact, to me, I watched Netflix video and while running on the treadmill, and that's how to have a life as well. So, and then I was watching the relationships between Vietnam and China and the geopolitical issues using the Netflix, and I love watching Netflix while I'm running on the treadmill. So I mean, you have to learn to learn. And that's something that we're now really focused on a lot in the schools. We don't teach students how to learn, right? How to manage, how to become a self-regulated learners. And I don't know why we're not doing any of that. Even in colleges, do they really learn how to learn better? Or do they teach students how to manage their time and resources and how to plan? All those skill sets, I don't think they're doing those things. So if we combine all these things, it comes down to the simple thing, how are we generating learnable moments best curated for the needs of the students? So there's so many things to learn from the industry, so many algorithms that we should adapt in the education space. I think instead of taking them as an enemy or as just the bad people, I think we have to find ways to collaborate.
And Saul's going to wrap this one up, and I'll be moving on to section 4 after this, which is the future. So I want the audience to think about what topics we should be covering in the future. And Tom and I are going to run around with microphones and have people give us 3 words that they think we should be including, not more than 3 words, in this conference next year. We'll do that after the panelists have a chance to predict the future for us. But Saul will go first on this one, and then we'll be switching to the future with all of you and give us your thoughts on the future. Now, Saul.
Yeah, I just want to try to basically steer the discussion of outsourcing in a really different direction. From what we can gather, we don't have great stats on it, about a quarter of the people that work as instructional designers are working in some sort of what we call contingent relationship. And that is they are not employees of the organization for whom they are working. And I think that's a really important thing because many of us our assumptions of all our models begin with the assumption that you're working internally. It's not a fair one. Second thing is instructional design and ed tech is a service, whether we work internally or externally, because most of us are not part of the core mission, unless, like I'm a professor. That part of me is the core mission. My students go on to be IDs working for a fully owned subsidiary of my university. They are not core to the mission of my university. They are a contracted service. There's a whole area of study in service design. Their contracting relationship is actually quite multifaceted. Ranges from everything from being an individual contractor who's brought on to do something to hiring a third-party firm to do a turnkey operation for you. And it's not the same thing in what you expect. And one of the things that I want to close with, because I could go on, but I think the other thing we remember, the question was who is a reputable vendor? I want to flip it around. Who is a decent client here? Because most of the vendors, they complain about the fact that clients don't know what they want, and that's exactly what they're going to get.
And if you want to follow up with Saul at the bar later, I found 2 drink coupons on a desk I will give to Saul to buy you a drink as well.
I'm not giving mine up.
So you can meet with Saul and talk about this topic later. We should move on to the 4th one, right, Tom? Welcome to the future. And so would you like to explain what
Well, we're very interested, and I think I speak for the executive committee and the panelists, that we're very interested in knowing what themes, what you see in the future of eLearn, what sorts of comings together you would like us to organize, because at the heels of this meeting, we're going into an executive session and talk about next year's eLearn. And so you're here, and we're thankful that you're here, but we'd also like to elicit your response in terms of how are we doing, where can we go, what's your agenda for the future?
Okay, what we will do is get the panelists to talk a bit first. Dr. Tom Reeves, Stephanie Pankey, Joa will start us off. We'll have the other panelists as well. But keep in mind, we started about 10 minutes late. If I can implore you to maybe stay an extra 5 or 10 minutes beyond 4 o'clock, if that's okay, I will promise to give you a free drink coupon. No, but I will find extra drink coupons. So Tom and I will be running through the audience at some point and ask your opinions about what we should include in this conference next year. So have 2, 3 words, 4 maybe maximum, of what we should be including or thinking about. First, let's go to the panelists. My esteemed colleague, Dr. Thomas Reeves from the University of Georgia, ranked number 3 in the country in football. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Kurt. I want to throw out a provocative question. Do you think you're smarter than a robot? There is a race going on. We're talking about the future. There's a race going on between human learning and machine learning. And if you think you're an instructional designer and you're going to win that race, you may be sadly mistaken. Because the economists at Oxford University have predicted that 44% of existing jobs will be eliminated by machine learning, robotics, artificial intelligence, and so forth. So the question is, do you think you're smarter than a robot? There are 3 outcomes that researchers in AI tell us that robots and machine learning won't be able to do in the near future. One is ideation, creativity. Another one is broad frame pattern recognition. And the third one is the ability to communicate with empathy and compassion. Now, are we teaching our students those 3 critical outcomes so that they will survive and they will thrive? I don't think so.
Stephanie, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I feel uniquely qualified to talk about the future because this is actually something that I learned from my grandmother as a kid. She could tell people about their future with an ordinary pack of playing cards. There are a few key ingredients to doing that. You have to create some sort of participation, so you let people shuffle the cards or touch the cards. Then you make it look very, very official what you're doing. And then you try to guess what are people's greatest fears and greatest hopes. And you talk about those things. And you can't go wrong. So that's pretty much futurology in a nutshell. But I do think that the stories we tell each other and ourselves about the future are super interesting because they tell us what our greatest hopes and our greatest fears are. So my future comment is, like, both Google and I have a significant birthday next year. I'll be 40, Google will be 20 years old, which means that I've spent half my life with searching for information and using these filters to my world. So I personally want to understand what that means, what that does, and what that means for myself, for others. So that is, I think, a trend or a research trend that I personally am interested in.
Nice energy. I was thinking about the future and MOOCs and how we still need a human element. So I think that the empathy piece and how you compose yourself and how you teach that to students. But if I were in a MOOC, I'd want to be with somebody live. I'd want somebody there. So there are enough people in enough time zones that could fill in a spot, and you could appoint somebody at that time to be there with you, to truly have somebody who could answer the questions that the robot couldn't or the MOOC couldn't.
We've only heard from Chris Devers once here. I know his voice is not working well, but can you give us a quick what you think?
Sure. I think the future really is open. I think there's an article called Pixels to Pencils, and they talk about how the pencil, teachers were really afraid of the pencil when it came out because it had an eraser, and they thought students won't think about their work anymore, right? They'll just be lackadaisical because they can erase what they want to do and they can do it again. And so I think we probably all have similar fears as faculty, as instructional designers about what the future holds. But I think just as a pencil is a tool and it's used arguably pretty well, I think new tools are coming out and we just have to make a decision. How do we use those tools in a way that serves our students well to increase their success in life, learning, and motivation?
Pass that on to Theo. He's been looking over this way. I've been avoiding his eyes because he's been winking. But he's the outgoing chair. I'm sure he's got some thoughts about the future.
Yeah, well, when I read about it, about this question, I answered for our institute and for universities and higher educational institutes, I think the future will be different than what we are now trying to do. Traditional institutes who have too much face-to-face have to do more digitally. And those who are only e-learning, so provide online courses, have to be more face-to-face. I think that the future has to be more and more blended. So I agree with Tom. I think that social relatedness in e-learning, in MOOCs, etc., becomes more and more important since we are living in a different world where everything is already digital, electronic, etc., etc. We want this human touch, this human contact, this human communication. So I think it will be a mix and it will be very blended.
You notice I got all the back row people. They're at a higher level, you see. Anybody from the front row who would like to chime in? Sanjaya, give us some quick... Oh, I'm sorry, we missed the last back row person here first.
The resident psychologist. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a couple of things very briefly. One is, I think if I'm speaking for higher education, which is a really odd thing, I will say that reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. I will also say 3 words which will mean much more than anything I can come up with. Read Audrey Waters. If you want to understand the future of education or educational technology, you really need to understand the history that's come before us with a very critical eye, and Hack Education is the best place to do it.
Thank you. Okay, now back to the front row.
I think it's kind of a doomsday prediction, but having listened what is prediction about, we are not futurologists, but I can share my concern. And my particular concern is that it's going to be more and more closed society in future. Though I am promoting more openness, OER things, but I think it's going to be closed because of the filters and algorithms that we are going to live in the coming days. Geolocations, device choices, my own clicks that I do on the net, all these things are going to be creating more closed society on the digital field. And particularly, I'm worried that this is going to affect teaching and learning in universities in the network world, because students will have different type of choices to access. Things are available, but they are not available to students. It's like the sea available to us, but we can't drink the water. That's kind of situation.
Saul was going to pass on this one, but I'm not going to let him pass. You got to say at least something you think about what's coming. Then we'll go to Sheila next after you. So go ahead, Saul.
I'm going to pass.
That's good
I'm
enough.
here to listen, really.
You sure?
Thank you very much.
I'm here to listen.
I think the future is going to be bright but different. The LMS is already dead as we know it. The role of the instruction designer is going to be radically different. Openness is going to be better defined. But I think there's going to be a lot of activity around AI, providing personalization and adaptation. I'd like to see more with big data, with geospatial data, mixed reality, and blending all this, of course, with the human touch. So those are a few thoughts. Sure.
Yes.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Okay, it will be everything. It will be diversity is the key. Old technologies never die. They're not going to. The LMS isn't going to die. Sadly, it should. But we're going to have more. It's going to be more open, more closed. It's going to be more controlling and more controlled by the learners. And I think we're going to see a lot of decoupling and recoupling. The notion that everything has to be done in an institution, in an institutional way that hasn't changed since medieval times is ludicrous and already being massively usurped. The first thing people do when they want to learn is to go to Wikipedia and Google. We are not the seat of learning anymore. The seat of learning is in people's own chairs. And we've got to get used to that. And being used to that means getting away from this producer orientation and not moving to a consumer orientation. That's ludicrous. It's moving to a community orientation, moving to the notion where we're all people learning with one another, from one another, that everybody who's out there, those billions of people connected to the internet, are part of our learning experience, and discovering how to integrate that. I think this is our challenge for the future. It's not doing better courses, let's get rid of courses. It's not doing better assessment. The whole notion of coupled assessment and teaching is ludicrous. Let's get rid of all of this, and let's do something brave in the future.
Yesterday in our pre-conference symposium, we had a keynote speaker at the end, and that keynote speaker is Dr. Paul Kim. In effect, Dr. Paul Kim gets the last chance to speak on Tuesday as well as Wednesday. Paul, we will get audience input, but the last one on the panel. Go ahead, Paul.
As a human, I think that we're very afraid of trying new things, and whenever there's a new idea, new practice comes to us, sometimes we feel the fear. And that fear stops us from understanding the new thing and embracing it and taking advantage of it. And I think that's quite norm. But I think in terms of AR and robotics and machine learning, you will get to a point very quickly, quicker than you realize, that you'll be very confused what is real and what's not real. And at the same time, you'll be interfacing with some sort of a being, whether it's artificial or actual human being, and you will get to a point that you'll be very confused and you won't be able to tell the difference. And I imagine that will be coming very quickly to us. And teaching assistants and professors and teachers, you will be confused whether that was you were talking to the real teacher or real teaching assistant or it was robotics. You will get to that point really quickly. So what we need to do is, I think we need to embrace it and be able to take advantage and lead with innovative ideas, not being afraid or not cutting off or putting them on the other side of the river and watch them. That's not the attitude I think we should have. And I think I mentioned yesterday with the first slide, we should be able to learn, unlearn, and relearn for life. And I think that's the right attitude for us.
Okay, we're going to put forth two challenges to end today. We're going to have, Tom's going to take the back 2 row people. I'm going to have the front 2 rows of people. And you're going to give me 3-4 words of something we should include next year in the conference. The panel up here will decide which of you has the most interesting thing to say, and they will respond to that most interesting comment from one of you. Whoever they respond to will get a book. They will decide who gets this final book. You're going to go around. Now, the second thing, the challenge is, I'm hoping that the front 2 rows of people have more ideas than the back 2 rows. Dr. Reynolds is hoping the back 2 rows has more ideas than the front 2 rows, because we have a bet. Whoever speaks the most, they get a free drink from the other person. So I'm hoping that front row people are going to have more active and engaging ideas. All you could have to give us 2, 3, 4, 5 words of something we should include in the conference next year, a topic that's hot, a topic, issue that you want to address. Raise your hands and we'll jump around. We'll be doing the jump around. We're from Wisconsin. We know the jump around really well. So raise your hands.
We're ready to go. We're ready to go.
Ready to go. Give us 3 words, okay, or 4 words.
OERs.
Your end, Tom?
The privilege that we spoke about this morning, MOOCs opening up education to more areas of the world. What does the future hold then for those students and moving forward?
It's more than words, but it's good words.
I'd like to see artificial intelligence for academic integrity and rigor and a feedback and evaluation.
Okay. Tom, your side?
I only have 1 word, ethics. There's a
Fatima
lack of
from Georgia
discussion
Tech.
of ethics as we just rapidly move forward with making choices and discussions about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I see a big lack of that at a lot of these conferences, especially when it comes to futurism and the way we do things. So ethics, I would very much like to see.
Yeah, I wanted to make a quick comment before I give my word. I just wanted to say that the future is already here, because at Georgia Tech, one of the professors, Ashok Goel, actually did artificial intelligence. He put Jill Watson into his class, online class, as a TA. Most of his students didn't know it was a TA. One of the students asked Jill Watson for a date.
Yes.
So it's already here. And my word is accessibility.
Okay.
Tom?
We're going right here.
Okay, one is students as curriculum.
Okay.
And improvisation.
All right.
So we can make more room for them.
Yeah, responsiveness, improvisation. Okay,
So
go, Kurt.
mine's accessibility, and I mean getting access to in remote areas. Like if we're really going to do open, make it open, but also accessible for people with learning disabilities. And something that I haven't seen much of is demographics. We're working in environments now that have our millennials are already there, and we have our baby boomers still working, and how that plays into both because they're very different learners.
Globalization of education, as in university partnerships.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I'm very interested in the human idea of creativity, curiosity, and being able to look after ourselves, because we have biological clocks, and our biological clock is determined by the way in which we understand how to take sleep and how to take our diets, etc. So I think that while we're looking at artificial intelligence and machines and so on, there are other things that we as human beings need to understand, and by the MOOCs, we can come to an understanding to how we should benefit from artificial intelligence, and also to release our creativity in order to be able to ideate new ideas and innovation. And I think that's the way forward, innovation. Thank you.
So for my opinion, no matter like across what kind of a technology you use, so there is like a common theme that how to measure the effectiveness of using that in a ways of pedagogy in a certain teaching setting. And another one is about like the open education about sustainability, because like a large like a dropout rate or other a lot of issues going on here. So how to sustain this learning during this open resources and open platform. Thank you.
Oh, we got one more.
Okay. Okay, like our speaker this morning said, decolonizing learning and also learner agency.
I would just like to see more of how technology is being used with pre-service teachers and in the K-12 classrooms, and particularly with online learning, because I know we have a UGA person up there, and that's the new thing in Georgia now, is we have to not only prepare our teachers to teach in an on-ground classroom, but we now have to prepare them to teach online. And so hearing more about what people are doing and what works, I think would be beneficial.
So for the future, I would like to see more language and intercultural communication support coming through TESOL and having it incorporated with eLearn.
Can you hear me back there? Okay, my word is the use of blockchain technology in education.
Okay, anyone in the front row? I'm going to lose this bet. Are we all out in the front row? We got one more person. Oh, well, you have a second one. Okay, you're going to save me a drink.
I would say network learning.
Anyone else in the back? Looks like, Tom, you're going to lose.
Excuse me, Kurt, you robbed some of my people.
I did not. This gentleman also has a comment I could see.
Learning analytics, using learning analytics.
Okay. The lady back there is combing her hair. Do you have a comment here?
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay, panelists, you have a number of topics that they've given you. I want you to spend the next 15 or 20 seconds deciding what is the topic that you would like to do as a final address, which of those topics as a group. So you guys are going to have to stand up and go talk to them for 15 seconds. I would like you to talk to people at your table about what topic you think we should be addressing as the final topic. We'll see if you all agree. So we'll spend the next 15, 20 seconds, half minute. What's the topic that you heard that you think is important for us to address?
I think we're coming towards a consensus on ethics.
You like the ethics one? I like the ethics one too.
Yeah, get the ethics. Yeah, I mean, there's all the rest. I mean, we love all the rest.
So why don't you say that?
Okay, we got it. We have a winner. We love them all. And we hope that we will address them all in all future conferences. But the winner for tonight is ethics.
We'll sign this book for you. What's your name in the back? The one who had ethics, what's your name? Denise. Put Denise's name on there, Tom. And the panelists will now address this ethics issue. Who would like to talk about ethics among the panelists?
Oh, crap. I think actually I'm going to slightly divert it into something very close to ethics. It was interesting to hear that we want to be talking. Some people would like to be talking about artificial intelligence. I think before we invent that, we need to invent real intelligence. I think that one of the major issues that bothers me about artificial intelligence is that it's not hard now. Computers can pass the Turing test within a limited context. That's fine, but they're not people. And learning education in particular, the stuff that most of us are doing, is about learning to be a human being in a human society. And yeah, this is not the stuff that I want to give over to a machine. I think we need to decide really very carefully about what the hardness of the technologies, the stuff that we embed in them, and the soft stuff, the stuff that matters, is about the stuff between people. And so everything what we're doing is ethics. We just happen to be doing it with a few machines.
This was, I think, an eye-opening session for all of us, the chance to build a bit of a community as well. And we can continue that tonight at the social. I want to thank John. I want to thank Sanjaya. I want to thank Stephanie, Tom, Saul, Sheila, Paul, Chris, Joa, Theo, and Rajiv. Okay, I'll thank myself. This was a first time. How many of you would like us to try something like this again in the future? Raise your hands. Okay, so we'll be talking about this. Maybe you have a different way we could do it. By all means, send us an email if there's a different way we could approach this, or maybe a different time or a different format, whatever it is. But I've enjoyed having these panelists here today with us. This is, for me, it's why I come to these events. I get to meet and hear from a lot of folks that are doing things in the trenches. Let's give them a huge thank you and round of applause for their service to the AAC conference called eLearn. We'll have fun next year in Las Vegas. We'll see you all there. We'll see you tonight at the social. Again, thank you, everyone.